Namaste, my friends, and welcome back to The Myth Within. I'm Dr. Tom, and I'm very grateful that you decided to join me here today. In the last segment on our exploration of the myth of Daedalus, we left off with Daedalus being locked within the confines of the labyrinth he created for King Minos. And as he was locked in the confines of literally a creation of his own ingenuity, he began to search for a way that he could escape from the labyrinth of what his mind ultimately created. At the end of the last segment, Minos began to think for himself. Daedalus began to think for himself that Minos may control the land and sea, said Daedalus, but not the regions of the air. I will try that way. So he set to work to fabricate wings for himself and his young son, Icarus. He wrought feathers together, beginning with the smallest and adding larger, so as to form an increasing surface. The larger ones he secured with thread, and the smaller with wax, and gave the whole a gentle curvature like the wings of a bird. Icarus, the boy, stood and looked on, sometimes running to gather up the feathers, which the wind had blown away, and then handling the wax and working it over with his fingers, by his play impeding his father in his labors. When at last the work was done, the artist, waving his wings, found himself buoyed upward and hung suspended, poising himself on the beaten air. Once again, the myth we are reading is from Thomas Bulfinch in his classic novel on all mythologies, which is happily entitled Bulfinch's Mythology. In today's segment, Daedalus is beginning to plan his escape from the tower that he's imprisoned within. It really is a tower that was once created by the ingenuity of his own mind. He sees that King Minos controls the land and the sea. King Minos had ordered that all vessels and all carts be searched for fear that the person with such an ingenious trait as Daedalus may escape from the prison he had placed him within. But he did not control the air because there was no worry about an individual taking flight from an airborne perspective. And so here we begin to see how the essence of what is wrong in Daedalus's life, this prison he created out of the source of his own ingenuity, really becomes a source of strength for him as he begins to problem solve. Now, this is in effect the way that our mind can create a double-edged sword. In its ability to think things through, it is very effective at problem solving, but in its own problem solving, it oftentimes negates the shadows of the problems that it can create. And so what lies as a source of our strength can also become a source of our own anxiety or imprisonment that's present. And with Daedalus being imprisoned in the ivory tower of the labyrinth he created for King Minos, he had to figure out a way to move on. So he couldn't move to the low ground here. He couldn't take to the ground. He couldn't take to the sea. He had to escape by air. And so when we see an escape by air, we're really exposed to the idea of a flight of fancy. Now, this is a common element of the mind. The mind, it flies, it moves from place to place. It's very ethereal or airy in nature. The substance of dreams is actually this ethereal context as well. And really, these sources of visions that are present within the myth, that are present within the psyche, that aspect of soul that drives us forward, really have this ethereal nature until they're made concrete, until they're made real. But in order to do that, we must begin to weave the steps needed. In fact, you may have just heard my bird in the background. Um, he likes the myth within as well. But when we're looking at interweaving the feathers, it's an element that he's building upon. He's set to work to fabricate the wings for himself and his young son, Icarus, weaving feathers together, beginning with the smallest and adding larger so as to form an increasing surface. Here we see a building upon the figments of this ethereal plan to move to the air. Here we have to give the dream substance. Now, for Daedalus, this dream really was an escape from an imprisonment of his own mind's doing. And he weaved the feathers together in such a way using the tools that were present, whether it be string or rope. Sometimes we sew a piece of torn clothing. We could cut a piece of clothing and make it into a new use. We could utilize the feathers or the environmental constructs that come our way, those sources of things like branches or leaves, to create works of art. And here, Daedalus has access to feathers, he has access to string, and he has access to wax. What could he do with it? So he begins to utilize his mind to help set him free from this imprisoned state. And so he begins to make a gentle curvature like the wings of a bird. And while he's doing this, while he's engaged in his work, as always, life happens around him. This is an important element of the story because there's work to be done. The elements of a dream remain just that until someone makes the plans and acts upon the plans to move those dreams into fruition. But when we decide to act upon the plan, just like you may have heard the birds in the background earlier, or if you get caught up for words at times, what ends up happening is that's life that's moving into the moment. And life continues to move into the moment, even though we may have plans to otherwise create something different. So, how do you adapt? How do you improvise? And in this segment, we're also introduced to Daedalus's son, Icarus, who is handling the wax and working it over with his fingers, but his play is impeding his father's work, his father's labors. How many times have we been impeded in our labors due to environmental contexts, such as children playing, or you may even hear my kids in the background as they're homeschooling? These things happen, and these are the elements of life, and they're to be welcomed. The bird just chirping in the background. Here we have a myth of an individual creating wings to escape from his imprisonment, but in the labors of his love, he oftentimes forgets those most important elements of beauty that surround him. And so here we have the idea of really the idea of going through the meadow but not seeing the flowers within it. I believe it was Walt Whitman that said something to that nature. I could be wrong, but I seem to remember it was Walt. When we go through the meadow and we don't see the beauty within it, we're really absent to life as it's unfolding. And this is an element where dreams can become problematic for the dreamer because it ultimately is the dream that they're chasing versus the life that's right before them. And so in his work, his son is impeding upon the labors that he has. But is it really an impediment to watch a boy or a child or a daughter play? That's food for thought. As we will see later in the story, there's never ascent without descent. And here we begin to see the crux where a child's play is really taken for granted. And then handling the wax and working it over with his fingers by his play, impeding his father in his labors. That play is the beauty of life. That play is the beauty of love. His father's labors are important because it is a labor to escape from the confines of the descent into the consciousness he had to undertake when he became imprisoned within the ingenuity created by his own mind. But it's in this play that we can begin to see the beauty of the ascent rising. And this too can have dangers to it, as we will see later in the story. I really want to thank you for joining me on this exploration of the myth of Daedalus. It's a very important myth for the way our psyche works, and I'm really happy to present it with you. And I hope you do enjoy. And until next time, my friends, I wish you namaste. May you have many blessings on your road to advance confidently in the direction of your dreams. Thank you. And leave me a comment if you wish. I'm more than happy to answer it on a podcast. Okay. Hope you have a good day and well wishes. Bye.